Hello, listeners, and welcome to Privacy Chats with Rachel and John, a podcast for privacy professionals and guess who else? Enthusiasts alike. I'm Rachel, and you're John.
You are Rachel, and I'm John. We're your hosts. So, Rachel, we've done a couple of chats recently about different types of scams. I think it sounds like we're still going down that road. What do you got for us
We
today?
have. I mean, it's a whole world on its own. We've talked about, scams with gift cards, most recently, timely around the holidays. But let's talk about a vector of scam that I am convinced that we have all encountered in some way, shape, or form, whether we've known it or not, which are text-based scams.
Okay, yeah, there's tons and tons of those out there. So let's see how deep we get into this one. Jump in.
Yeah, yeah. It is, adjacent to privacy in the sense that it is, again, always at risk of compromising our personal information as well as other things in the process. So that
Mhm.
is the element of privacy here today. Anything you're curious about?
So I am. There's recently I've been getting a lot of like texts that show up from just some random number that's not in my contacts. And it'll say
Mhm.
something like hello or hi or how are you? I don't respond to them. I take the advice that we offer to our listeners here. So I don't reply. I don't click on any links or anything. But so, if it is a legitimate person trying to contact me, I'm going to be missing out on those. But tell me, what have you learned in your research about these?
Yeah, so that is a very common scenario. I mean, just anecdotally, it's come up with dinners with families, friends over the holidays, and I'm surprised more people don't know about them. So with the random texts, we're talking about the ones that say like, "Hi, hello, how are you?" and nothing else. No, call to action.
Yeah.
No, none of that sense of urgency quite yet. Um, and the point of that is that the person on the other end, that random phone number, is trying to establish a communications trail that will demonstrate to the service provider a legitimate relationship with the phone number they're texting. Um, why is that? Service providers are getting smarter with anti-scam tactics generally. So
Okay.
scammers can no longer blast texts immediately after just registering that phone number without getting flagged as what they are, scammers. And so this is aptly called warming phone numbers.
So in the process, so really it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with me. They're just trying to get a response so that their phone number becomes more trusted. It has really nothing to do with me. Is that right?
Right. So it's saying to the service provider of whatever mobile carrier you have, these two people texted once before, they're
Yeah.
fine. If they're doing that with plenty of, other people, it's basically green lighting that phone number to message the
Yeah,
phone
yeah.
numbers that they will for use later, of course.
Okay. And I could see, on the back end, the carriers, applying some sort of AI system that would, figure all of that out. But if that's the case, if I get one of those and I don't reply to it, am I protecting myself from all harms and avoiding whatever scam is happening here?
So of course, I guess the answer is always yes. It's hard advice to follow for some people in a career or a service line
Yeah.
where they're expecting text from phone numbers that they might not
Yeah.
otherwise
Yeah,
have a
you pass out your
relationship with.
business card, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know. Yeah.
So, but again, yes, it is the one way to prevent yourself from getting scammed, but also a way to not allow this phone number to text you again and even be hopefully get flagged as sending just random spam texts without any reply at all. That's the theory. Now, more information on how much this prevents those scammers from actually being able to text phone numbers at all is a little unclear. But there is guidance from the FTC that's acknowledged this, and publications can be linked in our episode description. Even the FTC says that even if you just reply to the text but don't engage in further conversation, you've
Yeah.
still confirmed that they have reached a working telephone number, which can lead to more texts and calls from scammers, perhaps not even from that phone number, but from others. So it's still a paper trail you kind of want to leave
Yeah.
yourself out of regardless.
Yeah, that's good to know because I think, in some ways people will think like this is benign and I'll know to cut things off later on. So if this is just the first step, and you kind of pointed out there's already a benefit for the scammers by if we respond to them. Um, but let's say I do respond, you know. I just want to be helpful or friendly or I'm lonely. I don't
Yeah,
know. I do
you're
respond.
non-suspecting for sure.
Yeah. So what's going to happen?
In a way, the scammer's already won right there because they've let your guard down and allowed them to trust in the fact that you think that they're a real person.
Yeah.
Often the scammer will try to drag you along into further conversation, even though that maybe established they don't know you, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, wrong number," or "thought I was texting so and so. It might just be off by one digit." Haha, you know.
Yeah, I get that because I mean, what you're describing is a completely plausible conversation that might, come out of something like that. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and like we've all been there at some point, probably more or less recently with all the features that, smartphones and whatnot came out with. But
Yeah,
with a lot of us adjusted to that being a common scenario, the scammer will probably continue with, "Wow, you're so nice. Thanks for responding to a confused person anyway." "Oh, where are you from?" And then there they'll kind
right.
of invest in more legitimate like conversation and rapport building to build this persona around themselves, with their goal just
Sure.
being to distract you as far away as they can from the fact that they were just at one point a random number.
Yeah, I mean, so what you're saying there reminds me of a story. I want to say this was like, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago or something. It's been a while now. And it was a woman, it was in like around Thanksgiving time, or I think it was Thanksgiving. And a woman who sent a text message to a family member inviting them to Thanksgiving dinner, but she texted the wrong number. I don't know, maybe she had a digit number wrong or something. But this led to a text conversation between her and this stranger that received this message from her. And they had some chats back and forth. And as a result of that, she invited him to Thanksgiving dinner. Um, and in the news, it was about this heartwarming story about this, I wouldn't call her elderly, but this woman who was inviting this younger man, and they've continued that relationship, and every year she reaches out to him and he invites her, and it's on the news every year, like they're getting together again. So what you're telling me is that that guy shouldn't have answered the wrong number text and missed out on that whole heartwarming story and the new friendship that he has with this woman.
Sadly, I guess I am in a way, but the reality today is that it's far more likely that a wrong number is nefarious rather than a cool gateway to a new friendship that gets you on the news.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that makes me a little bit sad, but we'll have to rely on other ways to make new friends and form those connections. But so let's go back to the warming text thing. So presumably when we respond, in addition to confirming there's an active number like we already talked about, they're also getting some other information about us in the process. And if we're not expecting it's a scam and there's no immediate threat or anything, it's possible or likely, I don't know, so it depends on who you are,
Hmm.
that you might be in this conversation. You're going to talk about your location or what you're interested in. I mean, you're going to answer some of the questions that are being asked if you've decided to engage in this conversation. So, is that part of the scam? Are they going to work the answers to their questions into their scams?
Exactly. And unfortunately, like that, it's easier than you think. We like to assume scammers are just random people trying to make a quick buck. And in reality, they're
Yeah,
often like involved in these huge organizations with tons of resources and strategies for this sort of thing. And since
yeah,
they operate collectively in the hopes of getting a lot of small wins or score big one time,
hmm,
they're able to be patient with these, conversations and might carry out many of them. And
yeah.
after this deeper level of trust is established with someone, there are a couple of routes that a scammer can take, which really just depends on who you are and how you engage a lot of the time.
Yeah, so let's go to the next step. So like, let's say that I've responded and I'm in a conversation with them.
Getting chummy with a random person, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, people are lonely out there. I don't know. What's next? What should I expect? What's going to happen next?
Yeah, one common scenario that is getting a lot more awareness and traction is what is called a pig butchering scam.
Oh,
It
yikes.
sounds, yeah, kind of grotesque already, and I'll explain
Yeah,
why it's called that too. Again, you're continuing to text this person. They reveal information about themselves and perhaps just who they think they are,
yeah.
and they might start talking about interest, ask you about yours. I've seen an example where scammers asked, said they're from another country, and then they start talking about interests and recommendations if you visit that country and what food's good, and it's all innocent fun from there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would sound that way, but really, this is just another way for them to get more of our personal information, which is the thing that,
Yep.
all this time you and I are recommending that people have to protect our personal information.
For sure. And they keep gaining that trust and keep in mind these pig butchering scams are said to take weeks to materialize. So, the one scenario I was reading about, this scammer finds a way to bring a conversation around to cryptocurrency investments.
Yeah,
And in this case, that's how the scammer claims to make money. They're probably talking about occupations in this little text exchange. And the scammer describes how volatile it is and what their formula for making money is and the impact of the pandemic, yada yada. So it's getting very, convincing, and it's very patient. No one's asking you for stuff right away. And so they
yeah,
haven't even asked the victim to invest anything yet.
right. But I mean, yeah. So I can see where you're going with this, and so I'm assuming this pig butchering, and I actually hadn't heard that term before, but pig
Yeah.
butchering is really just some form of like catfishing to get people to invest. In this case, in crypto. Is this example that you're using? Is that
Yeah, yeah. And as well as, other actions. I said earlier there were multiple routes that these scams can take.
yeah,
Um, the idea is that they're all oriented around directly depositing money, from someone that you perceive as in need or that you trust or that you've perhaps
yeah,
found a romance with, i.e. those romance scams we have always talked about. But we don't have to dive all into those different scenarios quite yet. But I will say is that, eventually you'll get, if you are in these conversations, introduced to a sham investment like vehicle. You
yeah,
probably won't know it at the time, but you'll be redirected to some app or website that you feel safe depositing funds in, and you trust the person because of all this data they've given you. So there's
yeah.
actually a funny video about this, and when I say funny, I mean interesting, not in the haha
Right.
funny way.
Sure.
But I'll link in the description below that gave a lot of inspiration for these pig butchering scam scenarios and how they can actually get a lot of money out of people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna watch that for sure. I'm interested in looking at that, and mentioning like the romance scams and stuff like that really gets me. The people who are attacking, they shouldn't be attacking anyone, but when you're attacking vulnerable populations, it really bothers me. And
Oh
romance
yeah.
scams are people who are already kind of at their low and they're lonely and missing some, like they might be widows and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
anyway, um, so pig butchering, what's where did that name come from?
So it's something I recently learned about as well. But I'm surprised there wasn't really a term for this, given how I've heard of scenarios here and there that allude to this. It's a kind of more of the modus operandi operation blanket term name, as I've read,
Okay.
for
Yeah.
this broad category of social engineering. It's any long-term scam and investment type fraud, which the victim is gradually lured into making increasing contributions, usually in the form of crypto. The term pig butchering, of course, arises from that analogy of comparing, the initial phase of gaining the victim's trust and to fattening the pig to slaughter them. That's really graphic, but that's where it originates from.
Yeah, that's a terrible image with the fattened pig. But it definitely fits. And just so people aren't looking for, like, if they're not looking for me to invest in crypto, it might not be one of those. I'll say that that's not true
Not, oh
because
yeah, it doesn't
there's
work the other way
there's
around,
lots of
right?
scams, particularly like, since you mentioned romance scams, that people fall for those and they're not asked to send crypto. They're asked to send actual money or checks or
Mhm.
think because they're so deep into it that they're just willing to just keep going and they'll never report it. I even saw, I don't know, some TV show about somebody he was stopped at an airport in Australia as he was going to visit his girlfriend.
Mhm.
And it was clear to the person at the airport, like the customs or immigration person, that this guy was a victim of a scam. And he just refused to believe it. And I don't know. I guess he gets so stuck into this. But anyway, um, where did you, in your research, did you see where did these originate? Is there a source?
Yeah, so
Where did,
these ones that do just by correlation of the operation focus
okay.
on crypto as the way to transfer money. Apparently started in China, I guess, about a decade ago, and
Okay.
experienced, again, momentum on social media apps, more so in Southeast Asia at the time. But then eventually, once it was successful, they expanded this operation, moved to the rest of the world, especially during the pandemic, in, turning these full-blown fraud factories, into something really, really profitable. I mean, the availability of crypto and the lack of tracing for it obviously makes that a lot easier. And it
Yeah.
seems to take a particularly high level of, occurrence in, unfortunately, countries that are facing political instability.
Yeah, and that does make sense, and it's just unfortunate that there's so many people willing to engage in this type of fraud.
Yeah. And, I thought the same thing. And I know we're kind of living in the shoes of us as being victims here. But just doing
Yeah,
this research on the flip side of these, oh my gosh, pig butchering scams.
yeah,
Often the scammer on the other end, the person actually texting you, is also lured into these scams under false pretenses. And, they're trafficked for a job to another location and then now forced to commit the same fraud by honestly organized crime games a lot of the time. So I have sympathy to that respect as well. This is a big organization.
yeah, and I think we mentioned that in the last episode. We were talking about scammers using people in vulnerable populations, and
Yeah,
bucks to help them to perpetrate the next phase of it. So, I mean, I would hope that there's more being done to stop these operations at the source. But I also know that these originate from lots of different countries around the world. So the efforts to stop them are going to be inconsistent.
mhm,
What happens in I don't know. I shouldn't name countries. What happens in one country is going to be different from what happens in another from a law enforcement perspective.
for sure.
Um, we did talk in our last episode about some of the gift card scams, about people fighting back, and we talked about a couple of YouTube channels that are doing that. And I actually love seeing that happen. And I think that as a country and in an industry, we should do more to attack back. It's a very controversial topic
Yeah,
within the industry, and I definitely don't recommend that anyone does that of our listeners unless you really know what you're doing.
for sure.
Um, but I'd say for these victims, it's got to be difficult for them to reverse payments or get refunds or anything, like given that they've essentially willingly given money over to their I don't know,
Yeah,
their attacker.
you're absolutely right. And a quick loop back to that romance scam scenario you were talking about. This is what stuck out to me the most from a docu-series about romance scams that came out in 2020. It's called Love Fraud. I think that's the name of it. I'm like looking it up on the side
Okay.
because that comment reminded me of that. It was a guy that essentially just did a lot of romance scams with, different wealthier, younger individuals, females usually, that were very trusting of him over time, thought he was this
Sure.
rich, cool billionaire, and then found out that they were
Right.
just sending hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes to a guy that was just going to, peace out and leave and change his identity and leave to, a country that won't follow him. So that was the main thing. They couldn't get their money back because, in the eyes of the law in a lot of countries, they gave
You gave
over
them this
the
money,
money,
right?
lawfully. Of course, I don't know the entire details of the lawsuit at the tail end. There was a lot in progress at the time, but I hope you could kind of look at all the facts and see that there was lying going on leading up to that. But
Yeah,
um,
it's definitely fraud. And
yeah,
and if you're sending money to your boyfriend who's a billionaire, you're
he
being
happens to be known
scammed.
for that
Your
thing. Yeah,
billionaire boyfriends don't, actual billionaires
who
don't need
you've
you to
met
send them
once
money.
and then just has all these reasons to be all over the
Right.
world. Exactly.
Yeah.
But going back to, the refund or the
Yeah.
reversing payments, at least here in the US, the FTC is one agency who's aware of this, and their advice, of course, is not click or reply to links, but they have a reporting hotline to at least make these scams something they're aware of. And I'm sure if it gets more of a systemic traction, they can link these things. There's a
Yeah.
higher likelihood that these victims will, of course, get their money back. I don't want to call it a class action lawsuit, but something along those lines where a lot of people are coming together and sharing their story that is very similar and helps lead an investigation to conclusion.
Yeah, and it would be so interesting to learn more about what the FTC does with all of that information. I mean, clearly they're not going to be able to share it, but we just have to trust that they're doing what they
Hmm.
can. But and that even relies on victims reporting it. And like we've talked about before, sometimes people are so embarrassed that they got scammed or fell for something that they don't report it to neither the FTC or the FBI or law
Right.
enforcement or their own family who might support them.
Right.
But if so this kind of leads to another thing. If if you don't respond to it and you click on, and this is what I always do, is I click on the little thing that says report as junk.
Mhm.
I use an iPhone. I'm assuming something similar shows up on Android phones. But anyway, what happens when I click on that report as junk?
I wondered that too, because personally I swipe left and do the little trash icon, and just because it's there, I click delete and report junk. I was
Yeah,
probably doing that every day, 6 months leading up to the US election. Uh,
same, same.
and I found that, just through like research, if it's an iPhone conversation, of course, it's sent directly to Apple.
Okay.
Your cell phone carrier apparently doesn't have anything to do with the iMessage portion.
Well, they couldn't because of the end-to-end encryption.
Right. So,
I think, yeah. But what if it's not an iMessage? What if it's just
so if
like a
it's
regular
an
SMS?
Yeah, an MMS or an SMS, the little green bubbles, the
Yeah,
conversation will go to both your cell carrier and I guess to Apple, which, I don't know if that's like if there's iPhone somewhere on one end of the conversation or another, how that works. But
sure.
whether or not a human actually processes or takes any action will just depend on Apple or the carrier.
Well, so it depends, but do they
Mhm.
do anything? What do they do? Have you
There
were you
is
able to find anything?
was frustrated. There's very limited information out there that is what I'll say is like official from the source. Apple has one support page about the topic, but there's not much
Okay.
more detail about what happens after the junk is sent to them, just how to report the junk. I imagine that very similarly to, like we hope law enforcement agencies, they'll aggregate a lot of reports that are coming from, a similar phone number or collection of phone numbers, and they'll perhaps blacklist it after a certain period of time, kind of like how content reporting works on a lot of social media platforms today.
Yeah.
But it's tough to tell exactly what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, I get it. And the people who are kind of in the know about what's happening, they're not out there
Yeah,
sharing
on
it.
the
And
more perpetrator end, probably won't be
yeah.
sharing it.
Yeah, yeah, right. I've got so many more questions, but let's move on. So,
Yeah.
okay, so we've talked about warming phone numbers and your pig butchering text scams. That's kind of fester in my mind. Um, and the ultimate lesson here is don't respond to those. It sounds like blocking the numbers certainly can't hurt,
Mhm.
and reporting it might do some good. And I, definitely agree with that. As much information as we can give to law enforcement and places like the FTC. Um, but the degree of benefit that we get from that reporting is so far unknown, at least
Right.
based on your research. Um, so I'm curious about one other thing. So can we
Yeah, go ahead.
go? Okay, so a lot of us have gotten used to receiving text messages that claim to be from UPS. And I don't know, actually, I've seen some from the US Postal Service also. So from
Yeah.
a package or mail carrier. Um, to me, usually they're quite obviously not from UPS. So I haven't fallen for any of these. And usually they're going to say that they're about a package that the carrier is attempting to deliver. Um, it's going to contain what looks like a tracking number that's from that carrier. They're going to say something like, the driver can't find your address. It's not true. Drivers can find your address. Um, and they're requesting that you click on a link to reschedule the delivery or something.
Yeah.
So, did you find anything about these in your
Yeah, because
research?
we talked about these briefly at the end of the last episode, I think, and I've also gotten them a lot personally myself too, so I can picture exactly
Yeah,
what you're talking about. Those texts are 100% fake. We we all have a cute name for, I mean, honestly, a lot of text scams, but what I note these scams as is smishing, the SMS
yeah.
phishing texts.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see how they're effective, that it's creating a sense of urgency, which is one of the criteria that we talked about, or the thing, red flags for social engineering cases that we talked about in a previous episode. And, people want their packages, so they're like, "Oh, I need," and we're
Yeah, they're
all
like, for
waiting for a
sure.
package all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be
So,
something cool. I mean, yeah, text message phishing is tricky since there's not a way to validate that even the links that are contained, like that tracking number, that out to where you provide your address or whatever they're asking you for. There's no way to know if it's like legit. And it's really just a matter of sometimes even clicking on the link to get you into trouble.
yeah. Yeah.
It's
So
possible.
that's the best advice, the simplest advice, just ignore them, don't click on them,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, clicking on them even alone, not even inputting information after that. 'Cause
Yeah.
sometimes they have a little sham website that says looks like UPS and stuff spelled wrong and crap. And even at one point, even clicking on those links was dangerous. Based on this article I came across called thesecmaster.com. I'll link it in our description, but there were two specific vulnerabilities, both which enabled some level of arbitrary remote code execution on the receiver's device. And this was done by taking advantage of some of the iOS like RTC web protocols. So, for example, John, if you clicked on a website link in a text,
Yeah,
that big notification about your package not arriving, the web application stack was that was tasked with taking you from messages to the website that would be corrupted and created by the attacker. It would allow the attacker to then either get in like the middle of that code and manipulate
sure.
what's done with the information, or just elevate their privileges to your actual device. That's how sophisticated these were at one point.
Yeah, and I think overall, like in the industry, this is part of what there's like a family of what's called man in the middle attacks.
Yep.
Um, but it's and I think that what you're so because you said that that was eventually
Past
patched,
tense,
so it's a
yes.
good thing that there was like awareness about them and that the patches eventually happened, which is a good reminder that it's critical or crucial to keep your phones patched and updated, not just your phones, your laptops, everything that you've got.
Everything.
So I guess that's another tip here for our
Yeah,
listeners. Keep your
that's something I
devices
am
updated.
particularly annoying about with my friends and family because it is, maybe for them annoying to manually update stuff. I just set mine to automatic where it's possible.
Yeah.
Whenever I get the pop-ups, make sure I'm plugged in, make sure I'm on Wi-Fi and download the thing and get it over with.
Yeah, agreed.
But
That's what I do, and that's my recommendation to everyone also. Just let the automated updates happen.
yeah, okay, so now that we know that the super scary but has been patched, you can't just click on a link and get access to your phone right away.
Right.
Who knows what's out there again, but these are known security patches that have been solved. With text with fraudulent links, I want to share some components at least for identifying
Yeah.
whether
What to
something
look
is
for.
a smishing text. Yeah, kind of like
Yeah,
we have
perfect.
the web guides, the trainings for emails.
Sure.
A lot of these are going to resemble the same principles. Number one, if it's fraudulent but similar in the domain names for the senders, this is going to be a little, ambiguous to some. Number two, incorrect branding. So if you see like the shape of the UPS logo or the
Yeah.
USPS logo is a little bit different. Sometimes they send that email, or sorry, the text image of the icon to really send it and to make it look legit.
Yeah.
You can kind of spot that branding inconsistency pretty easily.
Right.
Number three, using generic information to make it seem like they know more than they do. So that, I'm going to skip down a few here, but an incorrect name or trying to use your name is one flag, and not much else. Maybe making up like a shipping number or something. So just be aware and kind of go, okay, this is nothing related to any verifiable source that I would only know on the other end if it's just a first name. Like anyone can find that and text you realistically,
Yeah.
get away with that. So the fourth one is my favorite, spelling errors. I don't know if you've experienced this, but
Yes.
they'll just
Yes.
butcher the crap out of really simple words, presumably because a lot of them are either non-English speaking countries or people on the other end of the line or generators of these scams. And sometimes that will fall with a fake link, although this is super hard to verify. So it's not my favorite tip. Number six, fake link. It's still best not to click. I wouldn't ask you to prove that for yourself.
Yeah. No, agreed. The all of those, I don't know, red flags or
Yeah,
criteria in the
things to
message
look
are
out for.
the things to look out for. They're the same indicators that you look for in emails and stuff like that. And yeah, that's a great list.
My
That's
favorite one, and for some you might giggle or laugh because you've related to this, but is the looking for the incorrect name or like referencing a family number or something instead of what's supposed to be you. My
yeah.
fiance gets this one all the time for some reason. They always want to text him and call him his sister's name or his dad's name. So it's close. It's like you got the information combined somewhere, but it's clearly a scam.
Yeah, agreed. And that's the first time you've referred to your partner as your fiance. So
Yes,
congratulations again, Rachel.
thank
Um,
you.
so where are we? I was thinking there was an adage that came to mind. You can have security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without security. Does that fit into this conversation?
I think so. It's a favorite of mine, and I have one last example I'd like to share
Okay.
based on just this collection of research into different text-based scams. So, John, let me ask, when was the last time you had to pay a road toll?
Yeah, toll. So I honestly I don't pay much attention to them anymore because I've got one of those little transponder doodads on my dashboard and they just
Oh
get
yeah.
paid automatically.
Oh,
Oh, is that not
cool.
a thing where you live?
Um,
No.
I, I only go to the same state and back, and then they
Oh,
have mobile apps for it, but more on that later.
so so I live on the East Coast where a lot of the states are close to each other.
Mm,
So I think there's some, I don't know, collaborative agreement that they all use, you know, a lot of the states use the same system. So I've got one transponder and I can drive, I don't know, anywhere that I would drive and it just works. I
yeah.
was in San Francisco last year and I drove over the Golden Gate Bridge, I
Hmm.
think it was, in a rental car and it had tolls, but there was no toll booths. Because is that a thing anymore? Toll booths at all? I think it's all like they take pictures and send it to you in the mail.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm used to, or even digitally
Yeah.
now.
So right. So and that's what they said that they were going to do. But I was like, I'm in a rental car, so the rental cars are going to get the picture, and then they're going to have to do something and then bill me back. I don't know. So I looked up online what to do, and I was able to go online and put the tag number of my rental car and just pay it proactively before they ever sent the thing
Yeah.
out. So
And it's good you took that action because we're sneaking into the scam territory here.
Well, yeah, I was wondering, like, why are we talking about tolls now? And I'm telling this whole story. So, where are you going with this, Rachel?
Oh, so according to the FBI, they've
Okay,
issued an announcement warning people of this vector being a smishing, campaign, I guess, possibility, using toll road collection as a pretext to trick victims into handing over personal information and money. Apparently, this
okay,
is has over 2,000 FBI complaints reporting about this. Earlier this year, I think it was something like April in the publication. I'm sure it's still a thing. But yeah, it's happening in at least three states at the time of writing. So I don't know if you've received any texts that
I,
like look like toll
I,
roads.
I haven't. I don't recall seeing any. If I did, I would have just immediately ignored it because I'm like, I have the
You paid
transponder
it.
system that, like, yeah, my get paid automatically, so I'm good. But what does a message like that? What does it typically look
What does
like?
it
What's
look
the
like? Yeah. So
criteria?
it
Yeah.
apparently it's a pretty simple one. It says the toll service's name, a brief message along the lines of, "We've noticed an outstanding amount of 1251 in your record. To avoid a late fee of some amount of dollars, visit, fake website to settle your
Yeah.
balance."
I could see, yeah, that makes sense, and I could see a lot of people falling for it. And if it's,
Yeah.
particularly if it's a small amount of money, it was like, I don't think I owe them, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I may as well just pay it, right? So
Right.
I could see people falling for that.
So there's that. I mean, there's two reasons why, and I can speak to my personal experience a little bit on this one, why I
Okay,
think it would be effective. I mean, sometime in 2019, I had traveled to California at the time, and I had received a notification about needing to pay
at all.
a toll. Now, this was over email, and this was after I had signed up for their, like, there's an app for it. I forget the exact name for the app, and perhaps it changed. But this was after I at least registered an account for it. So, this notification though, like the images I've seen of it were pretty close to like the real thing I could have seen, but the difference was mine was over email at the time. And it wasn't like containing any, even my email wasn't containing any verifying information like like an ID number. It was very similar to what I'm reading looks like the scam number. And I'll say secondly, I mean, I wasn't even aware at the time that I got this email that I owed money to California for the toll. I was on a road trip with a couple friends and I
Sure.
had full intentions of paying for it and we just let it slip by us. We were probably driving and talking, thinking, doing other things. So it was some 6 months before I actually got that email saying, "Hey, like you owe us money. Log into your app to complete this payment." And it said something about a late fee. And I'm like, "What? Since when?" So
Well, that's pretty tenacious on their part. I guess they want their money, but is there a chance that you were scammed or?
I, you know, there were, I mean, for one, I received it over email.
Okay.
I'd be interested to know if text-based notifications were a thing for this particular, toll booth at the time. I'm sure the nature of these scams could vary from state to state too. So I'm not going to pretend like I know it only exists over text. Perhaps it does over
Yeah.
email as well. But my amount was like relatively high. So that tipped me off at the time a little bit. I remember looking at it was something like $200. And
Okay.
so because of how high it was, it did trigger a sense of urgency. Of course, I went through my, app login, verified it, and then called someone and honestly begged them to give me some forgiveness on that. And I don't know if there was something like there was some lack of like connection with toll booth, registering into their database and trying to charge people after, or if it was me being forgetful. Again, 6 months passed, so I'm not super sure. But I
Yeah.
did end up talking to someone who, even through the app that I could verify, removed the charge. So I'm 99% sure I wasn't
Yeah,
scammed,
I
but
mean,
you're right.
it sounds to me like you did all of the right things. Like I think your response is what I would have done also.
Yeah.
But what does the FBI say? Because you said that there was an alert from the FBI. So
Yeah,
those alerts usually tell you what to do. So what's their advice?
for sure. If you received one of those texts, they asked to file a complaint. Of course, it's there's an ic3.gov website that I can link below, but also to include like the phone number it was from and the website listed in the text.
Right.
It may be more work for folks or embarrassing, but again, it's doing the right thing to keep us all scam free.
Hmm.
Secondly, check your account using the website or the app in my case that you downloaded. Some more advice as to logging into your banks to verify perhaps a notification that they're giving you.
Yeah.
And just do your own due diligence with the access that that you have that no one else does, with
Right.
two-factor authentication, of course, in the banking situations. But with this just being toll roads, I'm not not super sure if that's an option. Contacting the tolls service customer phone number, as I did. So that's another kind
Yeah.
of green flag as I
Reach
was
out to
reading
the
through those.
origin.
I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, someone was responding to me and they had the information on their end and they could see, the options that I had for, because I think I paid a reduced fee because it was like my first penalty or something. I wasn't someone who evaded, tolls all the time. And who
Right.
knows? Maybe there was some notification that I should have gotten that I didn't, and they're kind of seeing this systemically and going, okay, you get a little pass. I'm totally speculating on that one. I'm just surprised I didn't have to pay $200 just by asking. Um,
Yeah.
but then that go ahead. You're gonna say something.
Well, I was going to say, like, what the advice that they're offering here is similar to stuff that we talked about before.
Mhm.
That you're using your own information to reach out to that carrier, and don't trust what's in the email or the link, like or the text message. Don't click on things, or don't call the phone number that was sent to you because that might not be the right phone number. You
Yeah.
have to use your own source information. So yeah, I
Kind of,
like
it
that.
reminds me of the another adage, which is like trust but verify. But in this case, don't
It's true.
trust, only verify.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah,
in
good
the
point.
context
Don't
of scams,
trust.
of
Yeah.
course,
And of course, yeah, and that's what we've been saying over these last few episodes is you can't is be skeptical about
Yeah.
things right away. Um,
Ask for
so
forgiveness later if you ignored someone and they're like, I tried to contact you.
yeah,
And
they'll get
I
over
don't
it.
know.
You can find new friends.
Yeah.
Um, do you have anything else to share with us before we take off?
Well, so the last two tips, of course, they're delete the texts you receive, any smishing text. This can be for honestly all scenarios, but going back to what the FBI was saying about those toll road ones, I assume this is to avoid confusion for you in case you see it as legitimate later and forget. I mean, we get a ton of notifications on so many apps nowadays, so I don't doubt that's where that guidance comes from. But lastly, if you clicked on a link and provided your information, go and secure any accounts that are associated with that. In if there are things like financial accounts, especially linked to this stuff, like flip passwords, two-factor authentication should be, I think, helping you in the case where that's logins for things like banks are a possibility. But be sure to always attempt to dispute future charges too. I mean, I think we've talked about
Yeah.
this in recent episodes too, but my bank's always been pretty good with fraud that I've suspected and confirmed and has undone charges that I thought were suspicious without too much, verification or hoopla on the other end.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's so many of those things happen that financial institutions are used to getting those calls saying, "Hey, I've been scammed.
Yeah,
Help."
it's too
And they
common.
seem to be good about it. Yeah. Um, okay. I think we're getting close to the end of the road here.
Yeah, that was my last tech scam story. I'm not sure what to call this episode quite yet, but since the theme is around smishing, I'll probably find a play on words with that. We'll see.
Okay. So, yeah, hopefully you'll have that figured out by the time people are listening to it. There's usually a bit of a gap, although we're actually building up a bit of a backlog here, which I like.
Woohoo.
Um, So for our listeners, we'd actually like to get some feedback from people. So if people have any cool, interesting, unique security, privacy stories, or if you have requests for episode content, um, I don't think we're running out of ideas. Like you and I have not had trouble coming up with ideas for episodes, but
Surely not.
we'd love to get recommendations from the audience. So yeah.
Yeah. Great call out. I am forgetting one last thing, not a new content, but a little announcement. Before we go, please know that the information shared throughout this episode is that of our own and not affiliated in any way with our employers or other organizations. These episodes are produced on our own time and are based on our own research and professional opinions. It's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for doing the research on this one. This was great. And thanks
You got it.
for listening, and see you next time.
See you next time.